Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 21st of July, 2023, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
It's great to be with you, Mike.
And by video link, we've got Alex Thomson today. So we're going to get kicked off straight away with the online safety bill and the issue of surveillance, because it's not just the online safety bill that we need to be looking at here. Now, of course, we've heard over the last couple of weeks that Signal, WhatsApp, Apple and others are opposing the online safety bill because it's enabling mass surveillance. But as I say, it's not just the online safety bill, it's also the Investigatory Powers Act. Now, the Investigatory Powers Act has been in place for a long time, of course. It allows the government to bulk collect data on your internet activity and hold it for 12 months at a time, sort of rolling 12 months. That's probably why we should all be using VPNs on a daily basis. But the UK government wants to massively expand the scope of this. So let's just have a look at what they're saying here. This will all be happening through secondary legislation. So tech companies will have to clear new security features with the Home Office before they're implemented. So if you're a tech company and you're providing a messaging service and you want to improve the security of that messaging service, you've got to ask the UK government if you're allowed to do that. That's what they're proposing. The next thing is, let's bring the next one on screen. Non-UK companies will have to apply with changes which impact globally. This is what Apple is particularly concerned about. So if they have to implement something here, that they won't be able to just have it for the UK. They're going to have to effectively roll that out across the world. For example, breaking end-to-end encryption. This is also a target of the online safety bill. And then finally, tech companies will have to respond immediately to notices rather than wait for the result of any appeal. So what does that mean? What kind of notices are we talking about? Well, there are three notices under the Investigatory Powers Act. The first one is a data retention notice, and that requires the retention of communications data, which might be who, when, where, and how, for example, by operators. The second kind of notice that comes under this is the technical capability notice, which requires operators to provide and maintain technical capabilities enabling the government or enabling the tech companies to respond to government requests for information, and what they're describing as IPA authorizations. And finally, national security notices, which require the telecoms operator to take such specified steps as the Secretary of State considers necessary in the interests of national security. So that can basically be anything. This may include providing services or facilities for the purpose of facilitating or assisting an intelligence service to carry out its functions. So this is bulk data collection on a scale we haven't seen before. The IPA also specifies that those persons in receipt of a notice or any person employed or engaged for the purposes of that person's business may not disclose the existence or contents of the notice to any other person without permission of the Secretary of State. And for this reason, it is Home Office policy to neither confirm nor deny the existence of any notices. So that's what they are intending to do. What we're seeing with the online safety bill doesn't even scratch the surface of this. Now, there is a consultation which is running at the moment on this expansion of the Investigatory Powers Act, revised Investigatory Powers Act notices regimes consultation. It runs until the 31st of July 2023, so there's still time to take part in this. And if you want to take part in it, you need to send a message to IPA notices consultation at homeoffice.gov.uk. So coming back very briefly onto the online safety bill itself, that has been going through the House of Lords, and there's been an amendment made to that. It's been passed by the House of Lords. And what does that do? It basically requires the government to confirm that whenever they're asking for a tech company to provide access to end-to-end encrypted material, so in other words, tech companies are going to be required under, Patrick, as we know, the guise of child sexual imagery, protecting from that. They're going to require tech companies to scan end-to-end encrypted messages, effectively breaking end-to-end encryption, but that any request for companies to do that will now have to go through what's being described as a skilled person. Now, we don't know what that means because, of course, it's not defined very well, but that's what the amendment does. Everybody that's sort of commenting on this is saying this doesn't go nearly far enough, doesn't even scratch the surface, in fact. And then finally, on the online safety bill itself, I just want to mention this from the Open Rights Group, because another organization now has had a legal opinion about whether the online safety bill is actually legal or not. And this is basically what they're saying. There are real and significant issues regarding the lawfulness of a clause in the online safety bill, which requires social media platforms to proactively screen their users' content and prevent them from seeing anything deemed illegal. The opinion finds that there's likely to be significant interference with freedom of expression that is unforeseeable, which is thus not prescribed by law. So I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I'd be interested to get your thoughts, particularly on the investigatory powers legislation.
Well, I wanted to comment on one specific part of what you had on the investigative powers legislation. It was the bit about if anybody is contacted that they can't tell anybody. Is that right?
So basically, the government will make a notice to the telecoms companies or to the provider of the device that you're using, providing them with one of those three notices that we talked about. And that company, nor any employee of that company, is allowed to tell anybody else that that notice has been received. So they are not allowed to inform their customer, for example, that a notice has been received, asking them to start logging data of that customer.
So effectively, the government's extending its national security official secrets umbrella to the corporation at that point. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
So this reminds me of the Stasi in East Germany. Is that the society we want? So, but on the whether this it breaches this breaking end-to-end encryption, et cetera, Mike, breaches international law here, which you've just put up. This really comes down to the fundamental argument about, you need to weigh the potential risk of a few against all of the rights and civil liberties of everybody. And, if we look back at a basic utilitarian argument there, it really doesn't hold water. So we are basically jettisoning everything that we built society on post-Enlightenment and all of the democratic systems and rights that we built up, precedent law, and it's being basically swept away here. On what? For what reason? Because of the potential risk, because of this problem that supposedly is ubiquitous, but really it is a problem. Let's not argue that it is, but is this the way to, should everybody give up their rights and privacy just for that potential risk?
No, they shouldn't. And of course, Alex, this is really about training AI.
Yes, there will be more about AI and intelligence later in this news. And of course, that's exactly what it is for. We no doubt will put in the show notes an interview we had with two experts on AI, Jobst Landgraber and Barry Smith, that talked particularly about this, that AI is binary, it's black and white. It doesn't have human judgment at all. People often get lost in the weeds with these intelligence issues and what's justified. Well, even if you're outside the US, which has its Fourth Amendment and its specified language of unreasonable searches and seizures, people will be aware that the whole Anglo-Saxon legal tradition based in this area is based on the idea that you must have probable cause. The Americans, of course, got that from the best of the English tradition. And in theory, if not in practice, we have that still in English law too. You have to give probable cause. What's been obviated in what you've just outlined, Mike, is there's no test of reasonableness, certainly no judicial or parliamentary involvement. The Secretary of State, that is the executive branch policing his own patch, says, I think this is necessary. That's binary again, that's 0-1. So the Secretary of State's judgment has itself become a kind of computer.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on from that to another form of, perhaps there's a certain amount of bulk data collection in all this. Patrick, FedNow has been rolled out.
Rolled out yesterday morning here. So what is FedNow? This is supposedly here. Well, we asked that question in a second, but the fast payment network. So the question is this the CBDC? Is this the first step to the central bank digital currency that we've talked about, that many others are talking about? It's quite a big conversation now. And the question is, the answer to that question is...
Well, before we get on to that, I just want to highlight this because this is Project Fast. And the question is, where is FedNow coming from? And it seems to be that FedNow plus other fast payment systems around the world are basically based on the framework that this comes from. This is the World Bank. Project Fast is about frictionless, affordable, safe, timely transactions. But look who it's funded by, Patrick, in the bottom right hand of that slide, sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This is perhaps not a surprise to anybody. Their little website has a nice graphic of the world showing exactly where FAST has been rolled out or is in the process of being rolled out at the moment, including the United States. So let's come back to FedNow.
Well, the question I was about to ask which I didn't get to finish asking, is FedNow the first step of the rollout of the central bank digital currency? And the answer is clearly yes. That's the point that I was previously going to make. Slightly lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. Anyway, so here's the Bank of International Settlements. This is the website here. They've released this report a couple of weeks ago. I don't know, sure if you've covered it or not, but the blueprint for a future monetary system, improving the old, enabling the new. Very important report. You can see the PDF link down at the bottom there. So let's just look at that for a moment here. Here's the report. You can basically find this online. We've read this report. I've read most of it. And the language in here, quite frankly, is shocking. This is the type of language, the pejorative language, the assumptions that central banks have these certain attributes that the public trust and love and so forth. You have to remember they've been operating basically an opaque system. So it goes through the tokenization of the new monetary system under this new regime. And you can see, so it's great detail here. This is a good guide here for what they have in store. So I encourage people to go read this document and try to learn and understand what's in here. But we'll give you the basic boil down of this as well. So let's look at the key points. What are they actually showing here? What is this? Well, FedNow, or this central bank digital currency, what they're proposing here is a real-time settlement on the blockchain of transactions. So a tokenization of assets. Again, we can go into very deep detail on each of these bullet points, but this is just a summary. A global unified ledger of assets, okay? And also a private ledger for banks, this is important, but an open retail ledger for the public. So they have their own sort of system behind a wall and certain privileges, and you will have a different open, transparent system that everybody can see and track and is programmable. And they're putting interoperability as the main feature, and this is ISO 20022. So that's like the SWIFT messaging system. So that's the enhanced data that goes with every transaction. So this a token, just understand that a token or a transaction is basically a package of data. And so what is the data have now on a SWIFT transaction? It's limited. What is it going to have with this? Unlimited. And also interoperability with other big databases. So you can see the potential for this with programmable currencies, which is what we'll show you in a second, is pretty immense and quite horrifying, actually. So, and smart contracts and the Internet of Things marries those two concepts in this document. So now we can see what the Internet of Things was for and how it fits into this new financial world order. So very clearly, smart contracts, if you're familiar with Ethereum and some of these other blockchain technologies, that's the basis of that. Again, much more complicated than what we're saying here. We're giving you a basic summary here. So let's look at the rest. The total centralization, no peer-to-peer. That's the main point, okay? This is what they're communicating. Centralization's good, decentralization, not good. No peer-to-peer transactions allowed. They're too risky. Central banks are the only trusted source of money. They boast about this throughout the document, time and time again. They say, we are trusted. We've earned the trust of the global public because we're that trustworthy. They keep repeating that over and over. And therefore, we're the only ones who should be doing transactions. Central banks will have sovereign immunity, okay? That means they are sovereign immune for everything, basically. So that private ledger that we showed you, the central bank's own books, that has sovereign immunity. So they can do as they wish, to who they wish, and whatever. They're not liable really for anything according to this. Cryptocurrency is bad fundamentally, and decentralization is dangerous as a concept. So that's the basic takeaway of what's in this BIS document. Know it and learn it. So we've got a really nice paper that was written here called The 7 Pillars of the CBD System that gets into some of the details of this. These are the 7 pillars of the CBD system. You can see security issuance, the ISO 20022, instant payment, cross-border settlement, digital ID, stable coins. The holy trinity here, Mike, is the social credit, the digital wallet, and the CBDC. These three things they go together and they become fully operable once this system goes live. So that's the really important takeaway on this. So, just a little bit of a background. The Bank for International Settlements in Basel. This is a great book here, The Tower of Basel. It goes into all of the various things, how this bank was funded, and some of the nefarious activities that they get up to. And just think about, the HSBC drug money laundering scandal, Mike, and all these other things that we've seen time and time again, all these scandals. Those happen behind their wall, behind their curtain. Nothing changes here for the central banks. They carry on business as usual, but we get a new trackable, completely controlled surveillance-based system. That's the gist of this. So here's the story here. The Guardian reported this. I think this was 8 years ago. How the Bank of England helped the Nazis sell gold stolen from the Czechs and from the Bank of International Settlements. They facilitated that. So, and here's a good guide here. You mentioned this before the show, Mike. The Atlantic Council has put here the Central Bank Digital Currency Tracker. What is this? This is basically a guide to say around the world how far countries are along the line of adoption on this. So they've got an interactive map here. So you go to this website and you can pull it up and you can see the different countries. The green countries are in a pilot. The aqua countries are in development. The purple countries are just at the research stage, and a few of them have canceled. That's Nigeria. They're the only ones who have actually implemented it with a huge backlash. They're the pink magenta countries there. And then in terms of other countries, you've got Russia also, along with India. They have pilot programs going on this, as does China, as does Australia. As we said, the Fed now, this needs to be updated, I guess. Well, they haven't done it officially, the CBDC. A few countries have canceled it, okay? And what are those countries? Those will be in that color there. That's Ecuador. Ecuador has shelved this whole program. They've basically abandoned it. And Senegal as well in Africa. And I think maybe one more country, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's a good thing to give you an idea of where this project is globally. So go to the Atlantic Council's website. I'm not endorsing the Atlantic Council because I think it's a very corrupt and nefarious deep state organization. But if you want to find out how far along this thing is, there's the timeline, the race for future money. You can see they're pushing this pretty hard, Mike.
Indeed, which takes us to a little bit of video.
Right. So here is one of the chiefs of the Bank for International Settlements talking about the programmable money, programmable currency. And this is perhaps the most horrifying aspect of the CBDC. Let's watch this.
Our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
So what do you think about that? That's Augustine Carson. He's spokesperson, I guess, for the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland.
Well, I mean, what can we say about it? It's the whole thing is about the control of people's transactions. And I don't think we can, I keep saying we can't look at one particular area of policy these days on its own. We've got to look at it in the broader picture of what other developments are. So when you take that, and we're going to come on to Nigel Farage again in a second, we take that issue and we take the online safety issue and what we're allowed to say online, behavioral economics side of things, behavioral change. These are all coming together into one pretty unpleasant future for ourselves if we allow it to continue.
And so he's really talking about the cash there, saying how dangerous cash is because the central bank doesn't know where the money's going or coming from.
Right.
So so we have to basically relinquish all of our privacy for financial transactions or custodial assets because of what? Because of terrorists, arms dealers, or human traffickers, and organized crime. So that's what he's proposing. So they have the tools for a 15-minute city, for instance. Your currency could be programmed to not be usable outside of the M25, or your restrictions of movement. Add the carbon restrictions in there for the environment. You can see where this is going, right?
Yeah, particularly if you take into account that people trafficking, organized crime, this is stuff which is state-sponsored in many cases. It's all around conflict zones, which states are behind. It's not us as individuals that are behind these conflict zones. We're not doing the people trafficking. That's the excuse being used to shut us down.
And here's the one you'll absolutely love, Mike. They want to avoid the risk of an early exiter of depositors to prevent bank runs. So they will keep the money that you take and will control it so that the people who get out early or late will have the same status on their money. So who causes bank runs? Is it people or is it banks? Look at the Silicon Valley Bank. Total incompetency caused the crash,
right? Not
the depositors. So it's funny how the banks created the problems and now they've got all the solutions for this. So, and one of the other things they're going to do, if we look up on screen here, the Restrict Act, we talked about this in previous programs, Mike. This was going to make VPNs illegal. So what they're concerned about, and this was pushing back here, this is a great activist website here, Stop the Restrict Act. So they want to control the on-ramps and the off-ramps to things like cryptocurrency exchanges, and also get rid of anonymity. This is a really high priority. It's very important for them. So this is really important. So this is the type of activism that stopped the Restrict Act here. So there is hope in that sense. So you can see where it's going with the tech now. They're going to move on VPNs as well. They don't want the ability to have any anonymity online. Or be able to use any encryption, as you said before. So there's a war on right now, and it's really going to be up to, in America, they're really mobilizing and pushing back against this. What's happening in the UK, I'm not sure, or in Europe, but in America, people are starting to realize, including elected representatives, that this might not be a good hill to die on as a congressman or a senator. This brings us to another cancellation issue with a bank, and it's Nigel Farage. So we're familiar, we've reported on this with his cancellation of Coots, part of the NatWest group. So he had a town hall meeting, I believe it was in Newport, South Wales, recently. It was on GB News. And he said a few interesting things, and we'd like to comment on those afterwards. Here's Nigel Farage on this issue.
Since I spoke out a couple of weeks ago about the way I've been treated by Coots, a subsidiary of NatWest Bank, the public reaction has been truly astonishing. I've asked people, please come forward and tell me whether you've got a problem with your bank. We booked this venue some time ago, but would you believe this venue, this club, that has banked with NatWest for 55 years, currently has its accounts suspended? You see, what I've learned is this is not just about me, far, far from it. And it's not just about other political figures. It's about thousands of people all over this country, summarily having their bank accounts, both personal and business, closed. And that's why I decided to go public. I have to say, never after this, a letter was published. It was sent to me on email and then published more widely. And it comes from Dame Alison Rose, the Group Chief Executive Officer of the NatWest Group. Remember, this bank that has 19 million customers. Dear Mr. Farage, I am writing to apologise for the deeply inappropriate comments about yourself made in the now published papers prepared for the Wealth Committee. Group CEO. I welcome the FCA's reviews of regulatory rules associated with politically exposed persons, and we will implement the recommendations of our review alongside any changes that they or the government makes to the overall regulatory framework. Yours sincerely, Alison Rose. And what I've actually been told, quietly, privately, is that you were forced into doing this by the Treasury. But at least you've done it, I suppose. And let's remember, Dame Alison, you call it the Wealth Committee. Its real name is the Reputational Risk and Wealth Committee. And it was set up following your diversity review.
So a number of interesting points there, but he's introduced this term person, what is it? Politically exposed person.
Person, yeah.
So we'll come on to that in a second. What did Rishi have to say?
Well, just what Nigel said, I want to point out was really important is during the diversity review, this is when they implemented this new regime, okay? So under the ESG banner, diversity, equity, inclusion, so all of these things that we've been throwing red flags up about over the last couple of years, this is the end result of it. This is boots on the ground right now. So it's actually happened. Now you can see what we were warning about for so long. So I'm going to compliment the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, for tweeting this. He said regarding Farage's cancellation with Coutts and NatWest, he said, this is wrong. No one should be barred from using basic services for their political views. Free speech is the cornerstone of our democracy.
Now, you're being very polite there, and you're saying something quite positive, but
I'm trying.
Look at the words. No one should be barred. That's political speech. He can say that. He can say that while still having the policy that Nigel Farage and others should be barred. So we just got to be a little bit careful, I think, in interpreting what is coming out of these people's mouths.
But at least this is on Twitter. It's on the record, and it's not going to get deleted. So he has to hang his reputation on that statement, at least. I take your point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's just look at politically exposed persons. This is the House of Commons Library research briefing on politically exposed persons regime. So let's just briefly have a look at what they say. The politically exposed persons are individuals around the world with prominent public functions. Obvious examples are government ministers and members of parliament. They say the law recognised the risk of PEPs abusing their positions for private gain and using the financial system to launder the proceeds of this abuse. PEPs, as well as their families and close associates, must therefore go through enhanced security when using the services of certain firms that act as gatekeepers to the financial system, such as banks. And they say the Financial Action Task Force is an international body that sets and monitors anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing standards. Its recommendations, including on PEPs, have been adopted at EU level through directives, which have been implemented in the UK by secondary legislation. Alex, what confuses me here is that Nigel Farage has clearly been labelled a politically exposed person, but by that definition, he shouldn't have been, because he's not a government minister. He's not an officer of the state of any kind. He's a commentator at this stage. He's not even a politician. So how has this happened? That maybe you don't know the answer to this, but clearly the definition is being expanded massively.
It's definition creep, Mike. It's a variant of mission creep. The EU started chattering about PEPs in the first few months of it being a buzzword in Brussels. One was given to understand that it was Russian tycoons in Malta and Cyprus under EU purview, basically, who would be held in check because they might get their mistresses or their sons to hold their bribery wealth. That's crept to the position we now have. And far from it being PEPs, I would suggest that some British banks are now understanding this acronym as PUPs, politically undesirable persons. So that these things happen by not being challenged. And if you look at Farage's disclosures, which he managed to wheedle out of the RBS group, those papers for which the group chairwoman is apologising now, however insincerely, it's clear that the woke generation within the bank see it as their task. They found this to be the PEG, the idea of a PEP is a peg on which they can hang the coat of their social mission. I'm only just glad that her predecessor didn't manage to get me to work for Coutts, because when I left rugby school, Sir Ewan Ferguson, who was chairman of the governing body at the school and also chairman of the Coutts Bank at the time, and thus the Queen's banker, suggested strongly to me that I was an acceptable person to follow in his footsteps. But I could see then that they would be very susceptible to political winds.
Yeah. Okay.
And also to that point, in America, this would include somebody who's a political activist. This term is used there, and to debank somebody who is involved in helping to build a section of the wall, build a wall, that campaign. Dustin Stockton, he was labeled as a PEP. And then completely canceled across every institution. So he wasn't even, political office holder or anything like that. So, and if you look on the compliance companies that are providing the digital tools, the AI or machine learning digital tools to scan the web to create a risk profile for a potential PEP. The list that they have for basically what they're profiling is, talk about definition creep, what Alex is talking about. It is as long as your arm. I mean, it's going to just expand. So the AI tools, the computerized tools that banks will use in order to scan the internet, to create a profile about anybody applying for a bank or a loan or anything at that bank, those tools, you go and read those companies' websites, and you will be horrified with the power and what these things are. Totally automated, totally impersonal, and probably that's judge, jury, and executioner right there within the black box.
And if we imagine how bad it is now, imagine how it's going to be under a CBDC regime.
It enables all of that to happen in real time.
Absolutely.
And across every platform. So people, you got to get sort of organized on this, I think, pretty quickly. So
let's move on to Ukraine then, Patrick.
Right. So just let's give an update on what's happening here with the conflict in Ukraine. I think you're kicking this one off.
Well, indeed, because I just want to mention Ben Wallace and his comment that Ukraine has tragically become a battle lab. That's a pretty tragic statement in itself, and he seems to be quite proud of that fact. But moving on to the Kerch Bridge, we mentioned this on Monday, a little bit more on this. So this is going back to 2018 because the Kerch Bridge opened in 2018. And at the time, Alan Duncan said this: the opening of the bridge represents yet another violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and a further example of Russia's reckless behavior. This was the rhetoric from the British government in 2018. And the Russians in return said, as for relations between Russia and Great Britain, they're indeed at the worst level probably in history. Well, that was 2018. Things have got even worse since then. But I wanted to remind everybody, back in October last year, the Grey Zone published this. This is Kit Klauenberg, exposed before Ukraine blew up Kerch Bridge, British spies plotted it. And what he's saying here is that the secret British intelligence plot to blow up Crimea's Kerch Bridge is revealed in internal documents and correspondence obtained exclusively by the Grey Zone. So they're talking about, they're saying, Kit's saying the Kerch Bridge was attacked on October the 8th, suicide bombing apparently overseen by Ukraine's SBU intelligence services. He goes on to say this: detailed proposals for providing audacious support to Kiev's maritime raiding operations were drafted at the request of Chris Donnelly. Now, Chris Donnelly, he describes as a senior British Army intelligence operative and a veteran high-ranking NATO advisor. That is absolutely correct. But of course, he's more famous in recent years for being in charge of the Integrity Initiative, Russia propaganda machine. The wide-ranging plan's core component was the destruction of the bridge over the Kerch Strait. And he provides a couple of the slides from Chris Donnelly's presentation. I'm not going to go into the details of that now. You can have a look at that on the article. But this comes up to date now with a couple of days ago. Another article from Kit on the Grey Zone: leaked files suggest hidden British hand in latest Kerch Bridge strike. And he's saying this time the SBU appears to have used unmanned submarines to target the Kerch Bridge with explosives. A review of leaked files previously revealed by the Grey Zone provides some solid basis for again blaming Donnelly's cabal. So he highlights one organisation here, Prevail Partners, as the cutout enlisted to train a secret Ukrainian partisan army to target Russian territory with terror attacks. Prevail pledged to provide, he alleges, the SBU with extensive targeted expertise and technology for operations targeting Crimea. So this is the Prevail Partners website, a British risk management company. That's how they describe themselves, harnessing operational expertise from our world-class team, providing operational support, intelligence services, and leading capabilities, and supporting clients to deliver positive impacts. Well, was this a positive impact on the Kerch Bridge? It depends on your point of view, I suppose. The Grey Zone article goes on to say, from the perspective of Donnelly's intelligence cabal, the Odessa branch of the Ukrainian SBU was perfectly positioned to wreak havoc on Crimea. Located just over the Black Sea and filled with hardcore Maidan operatives, the unit signed a technical support agreement with Prevail and Thomas in Winslow, a self-described crisis management company. So let's look at their website. This is what it looks like. There's nothing much else there, but I do note that in the bottom paragraph there, it says, in addition to our work in Afghanistan, Thomas in Winslow is also establishing operations in Ukraine. The ongoing crisis in the region, which has been precipitated by Russia's aggression, has created a need for versatile and reliable support for the Ukrainian government, people, and industries.
Okay. It looks a bit glowy, that website, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And then finally, coming back to the grey zone, again, as part of the assessment by Prevail, representatives of the British company and TIW confidentially met in person with Odessa's SBU's deputy director. This summit focused heavily on targeting and specialist capability to support that function. Prevail and TIW felt they could add huge benefit to the SBU's existing human intelligence and electronic data capture capabilities, and so on. So again, the grey zone using leaked documents are making some significant allegations, and I do recommend people go and read those.
And on top of this, Scott Ritter, in a recent interview, I don't have it to hand, but it's on YouTube, one of his recent interviews, he basically is blaming the British for this latest attack with the unmanned underwater drones. And he's basically saying they're the only country that really has that tech. The Ukraine couldn't possibly deploy it and use it with any degree of skill and accuracy like the British could. And so he's placing the blame squarely on the UK. Yes. For that, and like the specialist diving teams like the DTXG and so forth. So listen, pedigree, form, capability, it's not really in the profile of the Ukrainian armed forces on this.
But in the meantime, the allegation is that in response and retaliation for this attack on the Kerch Bridge, the Russians are attacking the grain stores in Odessa.
So if it was the Ukrainians or the British or them together or NATO or whatever, what is the motive for this attack? Was it just to, terrorize the Russians? No, it was there's a bigger motive at play. So Russia has basically launched immediately in retaliation massive strikes on Odessa, hitting all sorts of port assets and so forth. We've also seen reports on Russian Telegram of NATO specialists evacuating from Odessa at this time as well. So as a result, Russia is imposing security restrictions on the Black Sea humanitarian corridor. Now we're getting down to the plot here. Mm-hmm. So who benefits this situation? Well, it basically brings the so-called grain deal to a screeching halt, for starters. And there's a number of other details beneath this that show that it looks to me like this was an act to cause a reaction by Russia, and to perhaps create a narrative in the global community that there's a global food crisis, and this is Russia's fault, and people are going to starve in Africa because of Putin's hitting Odessa. Of course, not talking at all about what triggered this. So from Russia's point of view, this was a security red line. They have always responded proportionately in kind, or maybe a little bit harder than when they were hit. So they always wait. Then there's the counterstrike. Russia's very predictable in that sense. It's always a response like for like. So, and we go on here. So, and this is another reason why banning RT in the UK and Europe might not be a great idea, because you might miss stories like this. Kiev threatens to sink civilian ships bound for Russia. Okay, so this is the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense warns that on July 21st, all vessels heading in the waters of the Black Sea in the direction of seaports of the Russian Federation may be considered by Ukraine to be carrying military cargo with all associated risks. Okay, now the amount of traffic in the Black Sea right now to Russian ports is immense. Mm-hmm. So what exactly are they saying here? Is this a potential crisis? If a statement like this internationally? Mm. Think about that for a moment. There's Russian grain coming out of Russian ports to the world. Right. Much more Russian grain, in fact. So here we go. On the grain story here of, again, 5 EU nations are pushing to extend the ban. So these are the countries in Europe. They don't want Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria. They don't want the Ukrainian grain because they say it's distorting the markets. So what's happened with all this grain? That 70%, it was all supposed to go to the starving poor of the global south. 70% of it has gone to, quote, rich countries, this Ukrainian grain, and only 3% has gone to Somalia, Yemen, Sudan, all of these so-called poor countries in the global south, only 3%. But as anyone would know when they're looking at any of the league tables on these, Russia supplies 20% of the global grain supply, and Ukraine is only around 5%. So this is worth about $6 billion a year, $500 million a month to Ukraine. So there's some money they make from it, but it's being resold for profit in Europe. So it's not doing what it's intended to do, and it appears that the West have tried to derail this so-called deal at every turn anyway. And this latest attack on the Kerch Bridge seems to be more of the same. So what exactly is going on here? I think this is done by design. Oh, the other thing is they agreed to connect Russia to the SWIFT system and to end sanctions on the Russian Agricultural Bank and retract sanctions on insurance for shipping. Very important. That was part of the grain deal, and it was never implemented by the West. So Russia's pulling out, and they're being blamed as basically sabotaging the grain deal now. So you can see this is a war of propaganda, this is a war of words, and the facts speak for themselves on this. It's pretty clear.
Right, so where does that take us then?
Well, this is just another caveat to this: toxic contamination found in Ukrainian grain on pesticide ban. In some countries, these are banned pesticide chemicals. So again, the market for the Ukrainian grain is questionable at that. So what's going to break the impasse here is we're going to need a European leader or a U.S. leader to come in and break this impasse, because this conflict does not look like it's going to have a negotiated settlement. Both sides, well, especially the NATO-Ukrainian side, Mike, is saying that we can't have a negotiated settlement until we get every bit of Ukrainian territory back to 1991 borders. That's clearly never going to happen, okay? So that means there's going to be no negotiations. So to keep pumping weapons in, as long as the so-called Ukrainians want to fight, okay? So what's it going to take? This is the first potential high-profile European leader to come out is Marine Le Pen. This is Le Figaro here on screen. Oh, sorry, we've go there. And this is what she said. She said, I do not understand that Emmanuel Macron is not fully focused on the organization of a conference for peace to put an end to the war. This is what she's come out and said publicly. This is the first time she's made such a statement like this. Now, Emmanuel Macron still has time in office, but this is, I think, significant because of the first significant European national leader to come out here and basically take a position on this, that no, this war just can't be an open-ended conflict.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, important.
Okay, cool. Right. Alex, I'm very interested to get your thoughts on this because Richard Moore, the head of MI6, was giving a speech a couple of days ago. The headline that was in the mainstream press was with respect to this, as they witnessed the venality, infighting, and sheer callous incompetence of their leaders. He's talking about the Russians in this part of the speech. The human factor is at its worst, he said. Many Russians are wrestling with the same dilemmas and the same tugs of conscience as their predecessors did in 1968. And he went on to say, I invite them to do what others have already done this past 18 months and join hands with us. Our door is always open. So he's absolutely calling for so-called dissident Russians to get involved with the security service. Was this a good idea? Secret intelligence service, sorry.
It might not be a good idea for all of them. Sir Richard does rather hint heavily in the speech with reference to an Abwehr agent in 1944 that if these enticed Russians come to a sticky end, then SIS will take care of their kith and kin for the next couple of generations. He's actually talking over the heads of his Czech hosts in this speech. You'll find the speech in the show notes with punctuational errors, which SIS never used to make, by the way. But he's speaking over the Czechs' heads to the Russians and saying, if you don't like it, if you think this is a repeat of the 1968 Prague Spring, and if you sympathize as Sakharov did with Dubček back then join our merry crew, essentially. So it's a bit of an untoward statement, but I think you have more to cover on the speech.
Yes, just one other little quote. Let's bring it on screen. My teams are now using AI to augment but not replace their own judgment about how people might act in various situations. They're combining their skills with AI and bulk data to identify and disrupt the flow of weapons to Russia for use against Ukraine. It's incredible how many excuses there are for this insatiable appetite for bulk data collection, Alex, by the security services of all kinds and the intelligence services of all kinds. But that's quite a statement there. particularly in light of what we've already covered today.
Quite. I mean, Sir Richard is using, as British spokesmen do abroad, a lot of flowery language in the early part of the speech. People aren't destroyed, but they're pulverized and ravaged in the speech. I don't think the Czechs necessarily understood the language, but it was showing off for an international audience. There was a lot going on there. The key idea was the human factor. But this AI towards the end is another reason why you must review the Jobst Landgraber and Barry Smith interview we did on AI, because Sir Richard scores a bullseye. He says the wrongest thing you could say about AI when he, at the end of the speech, says the Chinese are even worse than the Russians, and says the Chinese are so bad that we're having to use AI to assist our officers in deciding what our agents and our adversaries' actions may be. It's the very thing that Jobst and Barry say is completely impossible for AI with the credentials they have, namely judging what an individual human mind will do. Sir Richard says, is the key use for AI fighting the good fight.
Yes, indeed. Okay, now let's move on. If you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. You can pick up something at the UK Column shop, but please do share anything you find on the ukcolumn.org, UK Column extracts.co.uk, or any of the other platforms. So I'll just mention that a couple of things that are going on the website at the moment. David Cartland, an interview that was up yesterday. If you didn't see it on yesterday's 1 p.m. live stream, that is there. You can follow that up. Quick advertisement for the latest Freedom Festival, Freedom Music Fest 2023. This is Katie Jo Murfin's event taking place, what starts today, taking place over the next couple of days. I'm sure everybody is welcome at that. Reminder that AV13 is taking place on the 22nd of October 2023. And the AV team would just like us to remind everybody about that. Tickets still available if you want to go to that. And Alex, very briefly, a couple of nice mentions here.
Down in Kent, there's been this wonderful snap of a gentleman out on the streets urging people to switch off BBC Lies and watch UK Column. And you might think, wonderful. Where's this come from, however? It's come from a hatchet job. Kent Online, all of our local papers have been amalgamated into this no competition environment. So it's a brand that doesn't really have anything to do with Kent anymore. But the local franchise in Kent, Kent Online, is discussing the rebels on roundabouts who are spreading conspiracy theories in Kent. So that's UK Column has got a mention in local mainstream press on this basis, at least in image, not in text. But who wrote it? Daniel Essen, the local democracy reporter. He's funded, of course, by the British Broadcasting Corporation, because on the latest version of its charter, its license to operate from the Crown, the BBC undertook to pay 165 jobs for people in various parts of the United Kingdom to report on what might be called our democracy, if you're Rishi Sunak or Sir Richard Moore.
Yes, and then you wanted to finally just remind us about this on the UK Column website.
Yes, a Eurocrat is writing for us for the second time, Irene Lost, from Eastern Europe, and she has got a thought-provoking piece up on what's really going on with the French riots. Let's talk about France, a story of mitigation. She entitles it that because she is even-handed between left and right-wing anarchist and pro-government narratives on what's going on, and urges people finally to face up to the rivenness of their society. Otherwise, there will be no reconciliation.
Okay, now let's move on to the sexualization of children.
Yes, there's really just quick mentions given the timing, and one segment of mine will, I'm sure, go to extra time now about legal victories against wokeness. But let's bring this on screen first. This is from a French bus stop. You might be able to see that the République Française has put this billboard up at an advertising hoarding in a public place. The top right image there is Santé Publique, so it's the French public health authorities. And this is viewable to children, of course. The question being asked in this billboard is, penetration is hurting me. What should I do? So that's viewable to children. French charities and organizations are up in arms about it. This is pan-European now. It's clearly coming from UNESCO more than the EU. So Gripped in Ireland, a sort of equivalent of UK Column, has its key reporter, Ben Scallon, reporting that TUSLA, well known to our long-term viewers, the agency that likes to do questionable things with children in Ireland, has produced its own relationships and sexuality education guide Think of Public Child Protection Wales here. This is the Irish version. And it's urging the staff in these to learn about cross-dressing and drag. Horrendous details in here, but look particularly at this extract. The guidance is don't be put off. Don't let your embarrassment or discomfort or theirs, this is other people, including children, put you off. Carry on against your conscience. Wicked advice. In Austria, a Catholic outlet, Die Tagespost, has reported on a large petition. It's the title, the headline here translates as opposition is forming up to what it calls sexual pedagogy, sexualization in schools. This has been summarized in English by CNE News, based in the Netherlands, Christian Network Europe. The petition is about the assumption that children are sexual beings, going back to Kinsey. Again, Brian's interviews with Kim Isherwood, a vital background here, and Louise as well at Liberty Tactics has done a lot of interviews with Kim and others about this. Here's a crucial section. The most problematic premise is the view that the child is being seen as a sexual being. And the report notes that a paedophile activist, Helmut Kentler, I haven't actually heard of this particular specimen, but these theories have been criticized in Britain. A suggestion here that Britain, and particularly Wales, I think, is in the lead now in resisting this, and that Central Europe is benefiting from the activism there. It's not just Catholic Central Europe in Austria. The same thing is happening in Lutheran Norway. Vårt Land, quite a major outlet in Norway, is interviewing the head of Save the Children, Norway. I don't think they're connected with the British charity of that name, on plans to lower the age of consent to sexual activity in Norway. And again, CNE has an English summary of this, which, if you go through to the detail of, points out that Norwegian children were surveyed on behalf of this organization. A fairly large sample size, 880 Norwegian teenagers, were asked, do you want to have sex at a younger age? Over 3/4 of the girls and 2/3 of the boys said, no, we do not want consent. So you have to ask, who is this for, the lowering of sexual consent? Pretty obvious, I think, when you look into it more. Also from Norway, there is a queer academic interviewed by Redux, Feminist News and Opinion, they call themselves, who suggests that paedophilia, pederasty is a better name because paedophilia means sincere love for children, pederasty should be taught in schools as an innate sexuality. And the gentleman in question, Mr. Moen, the academic, it has targeted a Norwegian feminist, a lady that some people will have heard of, who faces potentially 3 years in prison for tweeting that men cannot be lesbians. Over in Finland, Päivi Räsänen, the former chairwoman of the Christian Democrats Party, who some will remember was cleared by the prosecutor over hate crime charges, is being given double jeopardy now. This was a couple of weeks ago, so persecuted probably till the grave if things go on like this.
So the message there, Alex, is that this is not just happening in the UK or the United States. This is something is happening right across society in Europe and the United States. So there must be a common source for it all.
If it's happening in Lutheran, Roman Catholic, Anglican, atheistic parts of Europe, non-member states of the EU like Norway and Switzerland, all at the same time, it's clearly coming from UN level and from NGOs.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Let's come back to the UK then. And Tobias Ellwood. Now, Tobias Ellwood, known very well as an MP, but also a reservist with 77th Brigade. He has been in Afghanistan, and he pushed out a little bit of video on his Twitter feed a couple of days ago, which caused quite a furore. We're just going to look at 20 seconds of it or so.
Here back in Helmand Province in Afghanistan, courtesy of the Halo Trust, and all that's happened here since 9/11. This is a very different country in deal. It feels different now that the Taliban have returned to power.
Well, it may be hard to believe, but security has vastly improved, corruption is down, and the opium trade has all but disappeared.
So that was quite an amazing, it went on for another couple of minutes, and it was very positive, very excited about what the Taliban's doing, and so on. Unfortunately, the response he got wasn't so good because he, of course, current chairman of the Defence Select Committee, 4 of the other Defence Select Committee members, so that Mark Francois, Richard Drax, Kevin Jones and Derek Twigg. Well, first of all, they called him an effing idiot. But then they decided that the best thing to do would be to oust him as chairman of the Defence Select Committee. So they've put a motion in to do that. It remains to be seen what will happen. So Tobias Ellwood very rapidly took the tweet down and replaced it with this one, which is basically giving a an apology. However well-intentioned reflections of my personal visit could have been worded better. It wasn't just worded badly, it was the happy, clappy music in behind. It was an absolute propaganda piece. But anyway, this isn't the main point. I didn't want to focus too much on that. I wanted to focus on the BBC's reaction, because here they are. This is the article that they published. MP claims Afghanistan a country transformed. And they were so irate about what Tobias Ellwood did, they decided to focus on many of the points that he made. But I just wanted to pick the opium trade issue. In his tweet, they write, Mr. Ellwood wrote that the opium trade ended, brackets, although the accompanying video, he qualified it by saying the trade had all but disappeared. However, this claim is incorrect. This is their claim. The claim is incorrect. It's absolutely definitive. Opium cultivation, they say, in 2022 was up by 32% compared with 2021, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Now, that last sentence is correct. That's correct. But before we explain why the sentiment is wrong, let's just inform you all about who has written this, because this is a report from BBC Verify. So, of course, it must be absolutely true, mustn't it? But let's just have a look at another article that the BBC published only a couple of weeks ago, where they were absolutely crying about the fact that the Taliban had slashed the poppy crops in the last few months. Inside the Taliban's war on drugs, opium poppy crops slashed. And let's look at the quote. The Taliban's decree wasn't applied to the 2022 opium harvest, which, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, increased by a third over 2021. So the BBC Vilify article has made that point. But this article goes on to say, this year, though, is very different. The evidence we saw on the ground is backed up by imagery taken from above. So the BBC has itself confirmed a couple of weeks ago what Tobias Ellwood has said in his little video. And then the BBC has written an article saying that Tobias Ellwood was wrong. So the BBC seems to be very, very confused about what reality is. And BBC Verify seems to be very confused about what reality is, because it's clear, Alex, isn't it, that in fact, reality is whatever suits the political narrative at the time, and the BBC always wants to push the political narrative at the time.
There is this unspoken imperative, isn't there, at the BBC and other public broadcasters to please the master. That's what the increasing numbers of whistleblowers coming out of mainstream journalism, legacy media, as Brian correctly calls it, they're all telling us this, that if you know what side your bread is buttered, as we often say in Britain, you will not criticize, you will not bite the hand that feeds. You know, that's going back to Sir Richard in Prague as well. I mean, he started his speech, I know this isn't the BBC, but he started his speech by saying, I should come humbly, any Brit should come humbly to the Czechs because of the past and the wartime past. But he didn't see fit to mention Monty Norman helping the Nazis filch Czech gold, did he? As Pat mentioned earlier in the news, that was left out.
Indeed. Okay, let's come on, Alex, then to opposition parties in Europe.
People will perhaps be aware of the Forum for Democracy in the Netherlands. Thierry Baudet is the party leader. They actually have quite a strong English-speaking and international arm to them now. And they have a strong showing in the Dutch Parliament. It's John Lochland, the Paris-based geopolitical commentator, who heads up FED International. Here, they have a video, which, if you find the link from show notes, you can also turn on the subtitles using that cogwheel and subtitle button next to the cogwheel. You can get it auto-translated English to find out what's going on here. The party leader, Baudet, and Mr. Bosma of his party are having a hearing at a committee stage, so it's between inter-party, but they're challenging the Minister of the Interior and Kingdom Relations in the Netherlands for suggesting that there are threats to democracy which may be so far-reaching that, in Baudet's interpretation, the FVD, the Forum for Democracy, might end up getting banned. So that's worth watching. The Telegraaf, a popular or populist tabloid, we can call it, reports that FED is keen to raise this issue with other parties because a cabal, what the FED themselves would call the cartel of parties, has formed. These experts of 12 experts who are at the initiative of party leaders in Parliament have been called to discuss threats to democracy. And there are quotations here, like the one on screen, which show that some of the party leaders have decided to take this opportunity to say that the FED just doesn't pass muster, isn't worth it, is a hard idiom to translate, is morally insufficient, is the suggestion of this idiom. So one of the party leaders in Parliament is telling the Telegraph directly, we are out to ban the FVD, because they say that the FVD is undermining our democracy and causing alarm. What else is going on here? In Germany, you have to look very hard to see what all the fuss is about here, but this is the outcome of the most recent elections for district-level public authorities known as Landsrat in Germany. If you look in the middle of Germany, you will see one paler blue blotch just north of all the Bavarian darker blue CSU-controlled Landsrats. There's one just inside Thuringia, which is now has an elected Landsrat belonging to the Alternative für Deutschland party, the rough equivalent of the FPD in the Netherlands. This caused a real stink, as you can imagine. So T-Online, a news amassing service read by millions of Germans because it's on the back of an old telecom monopoly, is reporting that the gentleman in question, Mr. Sesselman, a softly spoken employment lawyer with plump cheeks here, is a great threat to democracy. So they're checking his validity. They have this wonderful German phrase, Eignungsprüfung auf Verfassungstreue, meaning scrutinizing for loyalty to the Constitution, which was initiated a few weeks ago. I don't have any updates on it, but at province level, at Bundesland level, the same state, Thuringia, was going to have an AfD man chairing the parliament there, the land parliament. And Angela Merkel, when she was still chancellor, told them straight out, you will rerun this vote, the wrong man has been elected. So that's still going on. And this Eignungsprüfung is only meant to allow the insane to be excluded from office. So there's the real worries going on there amongst the Germans, or the mainstream anyway, about the rise of parliamentary representation by those who were not signed up to the cartel view, shall we say. Red Pill Germany has done a good coverage of this from a few weeks ago, which will be linked in the show notes. Good English language summary. And finally on this, Remix is reporting, which often has accurate coverage from the hard right, but accurate on what's going on here. So there has been an admission openly on Twitter by an activist that in order to defeat the AfD as it finds more elected representation like its first elected Landsrat now, Germany must bring in more migrants and immediately give them the franchise. This has been claimed by the founder of a migrant rescue boat non-governmental organization. There he is, Mr. Axel Steyer, who says that if we had had enough import of people from abroad, including by removing the visa requirement for Afghans so they can just fly from Kabul and become Germans, and if we had immediately enfranchised all these new Germans, Herr Sonneberg would not have been an issue today. So let's open the borders. Pretty clear what's going on there.
Is finally coming up. The story's finally bubbling up. So the latest FBI documents. So $10 million bribes. Okay. Now, mind you, this comes from an informant. So this is what they call a 1023 in the U.S. with the FBI. However, these allegations, Mike, can be corroborated by a number of data points that are in the public domain. And least of all, so what the Mail's saying here in this headline is that Burisma CEO says that Hunter Biden was stupid but necessary to keep on the board because his dad, who was vice president at the time, could protect them from problems. Okay, is that true or false? Well, let's listen to Joe Biden himself in 2018 here at this, I think it was a CFR event or at Harvard University. Go ahead, roll this.
I remember going over convincing our team, or others, to convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over for, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
So that kind of proves the accusation of this informant here, and that's the point here. But let's look at this again. So here's the big question. So there was an investigation. It wasn't into Hunter Biden from the Ukrainian prosecutor's office, right? It was something else. So what was the Ukraine prosecutor's investigation looking for? And if you remember, Mike, on this program a couple of weeks ago, I think it was in June, this was the investigation here. This was a massive money laundering scandal. Charges brought against Burisma owner there, Zhozhevsky, that he is accused of legalization, laundering funds obtained illicitly from a state budget for the purchases of bonds through Franklin Templeton Investments. That's a state bond scam worth $7.4 billion. You will not hear about this in the U.S. media, and why? Because this goes all the way up to the top levels of the Democrat and Republican donor class, including BlackRock, okay? Everybody's got their hands on this, and Obama's top donors. So this is all about Hunter Biden. But anyway, what this proves is that, remember when Trump got done for impeachment for allegedly telling Zelensky to investigate what the Bidens were up to? Well, the FBI should have investigated that years ago. Yeah. And so this proves that Trump was just asking the Ukrainians to investigate what the FBI already knew about and should have been investigating before that. So in a way, that's vindication of sorts, but slap on the wrist, I don't know. I don't think anybody's going to get indicted for anything serious on this, but there will be a political price to pay. And it could mean the removal of Joe Biden prematurely from the presidential race. Just saying. So watch this space. We will watch this space.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid we've got to leave it there for today. So thank you very much to Alex, and thank you to Patrick for joining us today. We'll be back in a few minutes for some extra if you're a UK column member. But otherwise, we'll see you at 1 p.m. on Monday as usual. Have a great weekend. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.